So I'm delighted today to welcome Steve and Svein. So Steve is from Edinburgh Napier University. He was actually the founder of one of the founders, I think, of LeanHE, and is also secretary to the International Association of Facilitators. Who knew there was such a thing? But I think that shows that we've got a little bit of an expert with us today. And Svein is from the University of the Arctic in Norway. That's where you're based, isn't it, Svein, I think? And you are the deputy chair of LeanHE Europe. So they've got lots of experience, both of continuous improvement, lean and facilitation between them. So delighted that they're able to join us today. They're going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then there's going to be a chance for questions at the end. So do pop your questions in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. So without further ado, Steve, if you'd like to share your slides, we can get going.
Super. There
Lovely.
we go. So we are awash with a sea of purple. It's like you're inside a Cadbury's Easter egg for this presentation. It's an absolute delight to be here. Svein, what are we going to talk about?
Yeah, well, I was so pleased to hear that there were a large contingent of Norwegians coming to the conference. And as I said a little bit earlier, we the Norwegians, have been to the UK before, a few hundred years back. And I'm just saying that, as you could on your screen probably see the way we traveled over back in the old days.
So this is where we are. I'm here in the north. Actually, the weather's quite nice out here. The sun's shining, the spring's in the air. How is it with you, Svein?
I just love it when you say I'm here in the north. I mean, so I am here in the north, well above the Arctic Circle. When I look out my window, I can't see anything because there's a huge pile of snow almost going up to the roof. So we've had some, if you latest day here.
But at least the sun's shining now up there, am I right?
We've got the sun back, and you might know, or most people might know, that we've had dual seasons in northern Norway. So we just come out of a period we call the polar night, which is a period of 2 months where the sun does not rise above the horizon. So it's quite dark. And now we are chasing for the period of the midnight sun, which will start in mid-May and last for 2 months, where the sun does not set for 2 months. So that is something that of course, I'm used to, but also something that defines us as people living here, and also the area here, and which the university kind of adheres to these dual seasons and quite a lot of changes. Yeah.
Nice. So what we're going to probably do is have this as a bit of a dialogue. Rather than us talking at you, we'll probably talk at each other, and we'll be responding to some of the prompts that you gave before the session. I don't know if you remember at registration, there were a few questions, and we're going to cover those off. We're going to talk about our facilitation model, and we're going to talk about what we think feeds our facilitation skills as we go through today. But firstly, a little bit about how we collaborate, Svein.
We've done that for a few years now, and many of you might have seen some of our YouTube videos on facilitation, and we've called that bærekraftig facilitation. So there's a bit of Scandi within there. And you can see kind of Steve's short explanation of what bærekraftig means. So if I would translate it directly, it would mean close to sustainability. But the word in Norwegian has 2 parts. The first one, bære, which means to be able to bear, to carry, and kraftig, which is more about powerfully, to do it well, to be able to take a load. So it carries more. And this is something that both me and Steve has meaning when we talk about facilitation, and some of the probably also the values that we use. So in our collaboration, we meet often each week, to discuss. And what this started out was a project for us to just start talking about facilitation and discover what this is all about. And at one point we thought that, well, this might be interesting for others, so let's record our conversations. So this is what we do, and we do that, and that has become also then a project of peer mentoring and development, and goes directly into the topic here, how we feed our facilitation skills by that, and as well then able to put it out there for others to enjoy or to find value in.
One thing that I would say is, if you are ever creating something on social media, don't use a special character in the name of your thing. The search engine optimization on Ballercrafting is not good. Finding us on YouTube is a challenge. I dare you to try it after this session and subscribe. You might take us over 100 subscribers. You could be our 100th subscriber. I tell you, influencers have got nothing on us, have they, Svenari? I tell you. But enough about us, a little about you. What was this question, Svenari? Remind me.
Well, in the registration, there was prompts or questions about you as participants and your experience on facilitation. And we've created a short overview of that representation here, as you can see. Yeah.
The first one was what's your experience in facilitation, and what we see is this skewed a little bit to the left there with people with little or no experience, but actually we've got quite a few people who are experienced or even expert facilitators on the call. Are you an expert facilitator, Svenari? Where are you on this graph, darling
I
man?
find it so hard to say that I'm an expert facilitator, but probably with the experience I have, with the kind of amount of facilitation I've done, the talks with you and some other stuff I've done, I would be towards that end.
But I find, and I suspect this might be the case for other folks on the call, that the more I do, the more I realize how little I know. You know, the more experience I get, the more I think, oh, good grief, that went awfully wrong. And we never, I mean, the thing that I find hard to get through my head is that pretty much every week we can find something new to talk about when it comes to facilitation. So there's an awful lot that we could talk about facilitation. Oh, I can see there's a hand. There was a hand that popped up, so we should talk about what we're doing with questions. If you do have any questions as we're going, bung them in chat. The amazing Sarah is going to keep an eye on chat and then field those questions back to us at the end of the session. And if she feels there's something really important, she'll interrupt us. So that's your challenge, to give Sarah something that means she needs to interrupt us. But yes, but so we find ourselves picking up facilitation themes every week. But what's interesting,
Steve, just a little back to what you said about the more we dive into it, the more we do, the more we learn. We find it that we know little, but it also, I would say, just that could also be you a little bit of overthinking, because I see that myself, but still. It's very easy to overcomplicate, right, when we talk about facilitation. So hopefully today we'll do a little bit of both simplify and then point to the complexity that will be there anyway. Yep.
You're a wise man, Svein. So the topics that came up, because the second question was, what topic would you want us to see? So we've done a little bit of analysis on this, and this is what we've found. So one topic that was a strong theme was sort of engagement, kind of how to generate conversation.
If I add, so engagement it has two sides, and some of the topics or questions that came up was also, I mean, the other side is not about there is engagement, but also lack of engagement. So we're going to talk about both.
There was also flexing your approach in the moment when some things don't go the way you expect to, or there's a surprise or something different happens.
Then there might be to point out that there's a small difference between you and me, Steve, is that I have to plan. I have to plan for the flexibility. But you know that I like those structures and the plans, which is always a topic of conversations between us. But I think it's going to play fine into what we're talking about today.
I'm much more comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity and leaning into a situation where I don't quite know what's going to be happening. As far as much more organized. There are pros and cons to both, and I think sometimes I'm quite well organized. I mean, reasonably. There was a thing about specifically about digital stuff, how to make the most of digital facilitation. With hybrid facilitation, when is facilitation a good or bad idea, and what tools to look at. So we'll dive into that a little bit. And then there was a theme around conflict. Oh, we love a bit of conflict, don't we? How to get the most out of conflicting views. Well, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, and not all about how to get the most out of conflicting views, but also the notion of you have to handle conflicts. You might have to handle angry people or upset people. And some of the questions, I mean, we have some examples here. Some of the questions did directly go on to that situation, that something arises or happens during something that you're facilitating, or of course, even before. So there's quite a lot to say about conflict.
And typically speaking, in our YouTube videos, what we would do is we would have a bit of a conversation. We'll share a story, we'll talk about a theme, and we'll maybe draw out a lesson from that. And that's what we're going to be working to do when it comes into those areas. And like good lean practitioners, starting with you, delivering what value is for yourselves, hopefully. But again, if there's anything you want to put in the chat, no one's made your life hard so far, Sarah. But let's see how we go. So what we want to do is to take the themes that we saw from the pre-event survey and see how that relates into the model that we developed. Because I guess we in that journey between our two northern and exceptionally northern places, we were delving into what makes facilitation work. How is facilitation done? You know, as lean practitioners, we were thinking, well, let's think about what's behind the magic of a good session. Can anyone facilitate? Is this teachable? What do we do? And so we started to explore that facilitation. And one of the things where people start when they come to facilitation is kind of the core of our model, isn't it, Svein? Methods.
It is, and methods is when I hold courses in facilitation, or whenever I talk about facilitation, people love to talk about methods, and this is probably, to my experience, where people go to the fastest. So we have a method that we would like to use. Could be a favorite one, and we know it well, but this is something I experienced that people go quite quickly to talk about methods within facilitation. And as we talk about in our model, this is more about the structures. What kind of structures could we add to facilitation that would actually help?
For me, one of my favorite, and we're not going to share methods particularly just now. I think you're right, Gretel. It is a bit of a comfort zone, and my comfort zone is affinity mapping, right? You know, so let's make one idea per post-it note. Arrange the post-it notes in the wall, put them into groups, put sticky notes on the groups. And actually, there's nothing wrong with that. Having a really good method. What I've observed is that behind all of the different methods, it seems that there's a step where we take some kind of truth and we expose the truth in a way that the group can do something with it, if that makes sense. Do you have a favorite method, Svein?
Well, you've already mentioned affinity mapping in well, as far as we could say that is a method or a way of working. And maybe similar, I often turn down to one-to-all. So individually, have a think, write down and post it, share 2 by 2, and then the whole group, as a means of actually activating people and activating everybody at an early stage. If you do that in rounds, it's also quite democratic. But methods is also something that we talk about when we talk scalability. I mean, affinity mapping, of course, you could do that with few people, or you could do as I did on this Friday with close to 30 people and 300 items that were produced before the session. Well, it was actually doable. Then I'm also a fan of methods for big group facilitation, like for instance, open space. But this is the case. We could talk about different methods for days and do that. And unfortunately, we won't have the time to actually go into a lot of methods today and explain them and make it very practical. But still, I'm recognizing the need to, or the feeling of going to a basic method that we know well, which feels, as Gretel said, kind of a safe comfort zone or a safe space.
I'd point you in the direction of Googling liberating structures. If you want a list of loads of them, you're probably already getting adverts for pip decks. If you want those sorts of things, there are loads of resources where you can find these things. And I like that comment in chat. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. I couldn't agree more, and I often reflect that back when talking with some of my colleagues at work. So methods at the core, that facilitative move. But we start to build out a little bit into here. And when we were thinking about change and flex, we pulled into the second kind of circle of our barocraftic facilitation model. Svein?
Yes, and this is where, when we started out thinking about this a few years, what I thought was the most important thing, or what facilitation is about. So there's something about skills or abilities. It might even feel that sometimes we dive into personality, but this where I thought, a little bit still think, that there's a little bit of magic. But I had a notion of this is something that you're born with, or you're not. But I was completely wrong, of course. I think it's you can train yourself. It's teachable. You could develop abilities, and you can work with them, and you can train to become better at it. But there's still some part of magic for me in this, and I see how different people use their own core strength to build their facilitation on that, and I think that is quite wise. Don't strive to be someone else. Don't model someone else, but use your own strengths. You could always find inspiration by others, but this is a point for me where I point to myself when it comes to facilitation.
And there is, of course, this is a Venn diagram. There's a crossover between the methods and the abilities that you have. I think about active listening or questioning. You know, these are core skills that we use as facilitators. When it comes to change and flex, that kind of question, what do you do when something goes wrong? Now, I'm a fan of having a series of, I mean, I should be careful, this is recorded on YouTube, but a series of statements which I can bring out pretty much in any situation, which give me a little bit of a pause and let me just have a bit of a think. So and often these take the form of questions, like, so if you were to observe what's happening right now as an outsider, what would you see? You know, it's a nice question. And it's something I'm comfortable asking, and I can then pause and go. I have some jokes that also fulfill that. But but for me, I have a, and this doesn't actually deal with how to flex, but it helps me deal with the panic of what to do when to flex. You know, it helps me think about, create some space so that my mind can catch up and then lean into what's going on, or even something which passes the decision to the group. You know, because really, as a facilitator, my power is to enable the group to make a decision. So to say, often we talk about this quite a lot in our videos, I'm observing this happening. Has anyone else noticed this? You know, those kind of give the decision to the group can be a very powerful thing to do. Thoughts, Svein?
Yeah, I just find I want to pick up on a comment from Darina. Says that planning helps, but flexibility is key. And then I think you could also actually plan and train for a little bit of flexibility. And this is what I think Stephen is saying here, by having these go-to sentences or statements that you could use and just pick up whenever you need them to do that. Also, Gretel is saying, is magic accidental or deliberate? A little bit of both, maybe. I tend to be a person who uses loads of humor. I see that I have sometimes planned for magic to happen because I could try to foresee what's going on. But you don't know if you get there. And that is also about the flexibility part. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and you need to switch around to do that.
I like this planning thing because that speaks to this part of the model, right? So we've got those core kind of moves, the skills and abilities that we might bring, the kind of the soft stuff, but there is the facilitative design, which is that kind of structure. And for those of you that are familiar with design thinking, you'll think of the design double diamond, right? Where you have the kind of the opening move and the closing move, and there's another one in the Design Council's Design Double Diamond. But in facilitation, often people talk about just standard structures that they have. There is a kind of a check-in, there's an opening where we kind of enable a little bit of chaos to come out. We discover something new about the world. And then there's the closing where we say, well, given that discovery, what do we do? How do we move to action? What do we take? What do we take with this? And then a bit of a checkout at the end. So I think, and there seems to be those kind of that fundamental agenda structure behind the design of a lot of facilitation, isn't there, Svein?
There is, or there should be. And again, they intersect these elements of the model, because when you talked about flexibility, then in the design phase, for me, that is where I do the planning that I need to do. And that means that as I work it, I could have a couple of scenarios planned ahead, or if this happens, I'll go there. If this happens, I'll go there. And then something totally different happens and I'll have to adjust to that. And for me, that is a part of still in the abilities section where I put on my armor of confidence. And this is something people say to me, oh, well, you're born with loads of confidence. Maybe, but this is also something you could put on. But design, this is about structure. It's about time, space, the agenda. And this is why we put mode here, is also because it goes into design. Is this something we do face to face? Do we do this online, or is it hybrid? And this is these days quite a big question. And I think that we're still in a phase where we try to understand which is which and what we can do in the different modes or the modalities of this. And we saw that some of the questions or topics that came in when you registered clearly were circling around mode or hybrid versus online and face-to-face, that we struggle a little bit with. And for me, I'm just going to blurt it out. I think it's like learning a new way of communicating to reacquire some kind of language. We know that when we look at people on a screen, we need to interpret signals differently like that. But I would think that with any kind of mode, I find that most things that I do face to face, I could also do digitally or even hybrid, even though it demands a little bit more and maybe even more manpower to do that well.
What about those people who said included in the questions coming into today? How do you make sure, and it crosses with that engagement piece, how do you know that people are engaged when you're online, Svein? How do you really know that they're listening to you, that they're doing the right stuff, that they're there? And
it's an excellent question. I often just counter that. I mean, I hold up to, I don't have a mirror. Do I have a mirror here? Look in yourself. I mean, how do you know that people are engaged and locked in if they're in the room? I mean, it's also hard, right? I could be in a room and I'm just not there. I'm just preoccupied with something else, and the one who's running the meeting or even facilitating the workshop wouldn't have a clue. So I think it's that is not as much as a difference between modes. It's more of what you actually do to try to understand if people are engaged, and how you as a facilitator play a part in that.
I think like many things, it's more, as you said earlier, it's similar than it's different. You know, I think if you have a way that people can respond and engage, and maybe through chat or maybe through a quiz or something, if it's online, I think you can. There are some really cool tools that you can use. People have asked about tools. I like Miro or Mural, but when I'm working in my university, often I use just a shared PowerPoint presentation because it's simpler. Everyone already knows how to use it, and I can use templates in PowerPoint and just co-edit a PowerPoint presentation in real time. And that kind of usability thing. Oh, Miro is a new thing. I don't know how to use it, even though it's quite easy. But just, oh, let's just use a PowerPoint presentation, and people understand how to use that kind of tech. I think is quite useful.
Yeah, I think I'm a fan of keeping it quite simple. It makes it easier for people to be engaged if they have to be to use their cognitive skills to try to understand how the tool works. Even if it's face-to-face or online, then you run the risk of disengagement on what's really going on. I mean, we try to create that space where people could share thoughts, reflect, challenge each other, and move forward. So that's for me is a vital point. Not long ago, I ran together with some colleagues, I created a escape room workshop that we use in lean training. And when I've run it several times and with different kind of organizations, and what I see is that people get super engaged and they are totally into it. But the last time I ran it, and I think it's only me as facilitator noticed, there was one person who totally disengaged, but the others were so preoccupied they never noticed. The question for me then is, should I intervene? Should I try to engage that person into what's going on, having the risk of losing the engagement from some of the others who probably would get aware and then worrying at what are we doing wrong when there's a situation like this. So still, it's, I mean, engagement goes across modes, I think.
Yep. I'm interested. There's in chat, Dorina's commented about how do we make stuff accessible to everyone else and what approaches you use. I mean, it's genuinely inclusive facilitation can be really challenging because because not all facilitation that's inclusive for one person is inclusive for another. I think when dealing with working face to face, for some people that's much more inclusive, and I'm able to deal with that and make a structure which is better. For others, working online is much easier in terms of inclusivity. For me, I think the challenge is to be constantly reflecting on my practice and working on how I can do the best thing for the group and listening to what the needs of the group is, because there's always a lot of stuff going on. You know, there's one of the bits of our model which we'll speak to, and maybe conflict hits this a little bit, is around social conflict. Now, Norway, a good social country up there. Svein, talk to us about social context.
Yeah, I'm not sure that even if we are a kind of a social democratic country, this means that we are good on social context. We live here up in the north. We are a few people with huge distances. It feels quite good to have that distance. Maybe we don't need to care too much about others. Our neighbors, the Finns, in Finland, they said during the pandemic, they were so happy when the pandemic was over because they could go back to the normal 5-meter distance and not the 2-meter distance. Now, I think that social context for me is something that I haven't seen a lot in models of facilitation. I mean, it could be be there as something that is kind of underpinning. I've always loved lifting social context in facilitation, because I think that for me as a facilitator, there lies so much there that have helped me to understand some of the stuff that's going on. And what we mean about social context is, of course, everything that surrounds yourself as a facilitator, and of course the group that you're facilitating, and even those who commission you to do it, even if if you're an external consultant, facilitator, or internal, there is something to be said about this. And this is where we find that people have loads of examples, and also maybe not examples, but worries about what's going to happen when we start out on this with this session. So I want to do a pitch for social context as an important element in facilitation.
And this is, I know people are talking about that. What I always bear in mind, that inclusivity piece is like everybody, as they come into this session, is bringing with them something. And we talk about the weather at the start, but actually, if you're Svenari in the north in the 6th month of the winter, it's going to make a difference to the position that we're in. And I think as facilitators, often we're very keen to push people to a decision. But that kind of in the moment decision, you must make this decision now in order to get to the output of the workshop. But that itself can be really uninclusive, and is worth thinking about before you go into that session. That well, can we create a space where people can take a moment to reflect before they can go into making that decision there?
So it means that inclusivity covers a whole range of stuff, not only to the extent that someone would be hearing impaired, or if you have someone in the group who sits in a wheelchair or stuff like that, but also on the cognitive side, and also where they're at mentally when they start out, as you say. This could be a turn-off for people to actually be there and having to engage and offer their own opinions. But
quite often before a session, I will say the session will evolve as we're in it. If it would help you to understand the agenda for the session and the question I'm likely to ask and how it will go, get in touch, and I'm happy to explain and break that down for you, because sometimes that's really helpful for people to participate. One of the things that was identified coming into this is conflicts, Svenare, that we've put into here. What's going on there?
Yeah, I've had my experiences of conflict and just stuff that happens that you couldn't imagine. I know you have a story, Steve, of someone stating quite clearly that I don't want to be here.
Yeah. I was running facilitating a focus group, and there was a person who came into this focus group, and I don't think they would mind me telling you this story at all, because they had a truth to share, but they said, well, I don't have the time to be here. I can't contribute to this. The people who are running this process aren't in the room. I don't know how I can help with this. I don't know why I'm here, what's going on. So in that moment, my heart sinks, and I'm like, oh, what do I do? How do I manage that? And I kind of, and right now I'm thinking about kind of positional authority and all those kind of issues that are happening there. But so I kind of thought, well, what is the truth here? And the truth is that actually, if this person is running a process and genuinely the university is going to fall over if they're not doing it, I want them to be running the process, right? So I asked the person if they wouldn't mind having a little chat outside the room, so it wasn't in a public space, and said, well, look, if you need to go and do something else, go and do it. That's okay. You're not forced to be here. But here's why you were invited to be here, because actually we think you might have something to say. And the reason that the people who run this process aren't here is so that people can speak freely. So I would personally appreciate it if you would like to come back and share those thoughts. But if you don't, that's okay. And this person chose to come back in and actually contributed very positively. And I believe changes were made to how things worked as a result of it. But in a way, it comes back to our job as trying to expose the truth helpfully, in a way there, and not judging. I mean, like being deeply unjudgmental about what's happening, and playing that back as kind of an objective listener.
I just want to say, I think for me that is a really good advice to try not to judge people, because really we don't have a clue what's going on. We can only see what's going on and do our own interpretations. And people could be in all kinds of situations. So what you did there, I think, is also good advice. Take that mini break. I mean, it's also good for the cognitive stuff. Have that talk aside. It's just a feeling that sometimes you have to handle something that feels awkward or even not dangerous, but it feels like it's a heated moment. And I talked with a professor in cognitive psychology who said, well, there's just a basic advice. Don't quarrel with people who are angry. Don't do that. I mean, take it aside. Maybe you have to let them actually say their piece, even though we have a group there that will be affected. I had that once time, a person who shouted out quite angrily that I won't sit in a AA circle. And I mean, what's going on there? And don't go up there in someone's face and say, now you have to calm down and be confronted. I mean, it doesn't help. So for me, my go-to method here when stuff like that happens is kind of take that break. I mean, so what if the break isn't planned? And listen to people, and then don't judge. And that goes also for us as facilitators. And we, I mean, life is here. Life happens as we go, and we all struggle with stuff also when we go into sessions. So probably everyone here have their own experience with going to work and doing stuff while we have a situation going on that's not there. And sometimes you have to choose that. Maybe I'm not. What do the pilots say? I'm not fit for flight. Maybe you're not fit for facilitating today. And sometimes do that thought, and well, sometimes we just have to cancel, right? Or if you're lucky, you set this up and plan with someone else, then you could go ahead. But sometimes we need to do that, and that is about thinking about ourselves, and also then understanding the group and the stuff that's going on around. And you said to me, Steve, once you even checked the newspapers. Has anything happened that could affect this?
Yes, if I'm dealing with a big with a high stakes thing, or at the start of a conference, I'll often check the news. Is there anything happening in the news here that means that I need to reference this, or something that's going on that I need that might be affecting people? That I might say, well, this thing's happened in the news. If you need to go and take time for that, take time for that. You know, I love Emma's comment in chat about sharing the agenda and knowing when the breaks are. Nothing gets up my doodah more than not having a break. Do you know, maybe it's just I've reached a certain stage in life that I need a break frequently, but it's like we all need it. And there's this kind of view that we're going to carry on for just kind of back to backs all day. It just doesn't work.
But this is also where social context comes to play. I mean, some people in your 20 people group would be like, we need to move on. There's no room for breaks, but clearly others need that. So I mean, it comes into play almost to every extent of facilitation.
And I like to, for those people who really are workaholics, it's quite nice to say, well, take a break. Whilst we're having a break, why don't you think about this? Or do that, or give people permission to think about this, or just take a break. So let people use it. And as I facilitate more, I'm feeling the need to control less, if that makes sense. And seeing my job more as about giving responsibility to the group about what they do. But the thing about social context is worth thinking about, because that kind of restricts or enables all of it.
One last question, Steve. Have you ever been in a situation where you someone who's commissioned you to do some facilitation comes up to you and said, you have to be aware there are 2 people in that group. You need to know that blah, blah, blah. What do you do about that? Is that valuable information, or is it, what is that?
Is it gossiping or is it helpful?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
When someone comes up and says, you need to know about X, Y, and Z.
Can I have a quiet word?
Can I have a quiet word about this?
Yeah.
I am always sort of a little bit aware about, and there was a phrase that someone taught me once, those sort of logically necessary structural hierarchy kind of issues, those power plays that people do. And it's really, and I listen to that, but what I tend to do is I tend to, before someone goes into, let me tell you this, I say, well, bear in mind that my job is here to work for the group and we want to go through that. I mean, but what do you do when someone says, can I have a quiet word, please, Svein?
Well, I do the same. I tend to listen, but also I have been a couple of times I've just said, okay, I see where you're going with this. I would prefer to make up my own opinion, because it's not. It seems it's more gossip, or it could be, for all I know, a person who hates another person and wants to kind of install some opinions in me already. So I've said that. Also, I mean, Chiara has a question in here on roles, which also goes to how far should you as a facilitator go? I mean, it's the job, isn't it, to have people come out, participate. Maybe you have to actually also calm some down and have them step in the background a little bit. And this is the classical one where you have a leader with strong opinions in the room. Well, I clarify these things when I start, that I will actually do that. I will in a nice manner tell people to be quiet, even if it's a leader. I mean, if I haven't clarified that, and this goes into my planning and for social context, if that is not kind of allowed for me to do as a facilitator, they need to get another facilitator, even internal. So I try to clarify that quite early on.
You can use methods as your ally when it comes to democratizing space. Often, even when there isn't someone who is positionally, who's an authority in a room, who is part of the discussion, but often we have colleagues who are just more comfortable speaking than others. So using written feedback is a way of democratizing that. And of course, reading and writing is faster than talking, so you can get through more content. So that's when an affinity mapping exercise helps. I was working with one client group recently, and I said, would you let us try using a speaking object? Now, I wouldn't try that with every group in my university, but these guys were up for it, and that actually meant it was a challenging situation that this team was navigating through. It was a difficult time for them, but actually each respecting the time through an object that they held to speak was actually meant that it could only be one person. And I think it must have worked, because I heard they repeated it at a meeting a couple of days later. So those methods can help mitigate for for that stuff that's going on within that group, where someone might have a louder voice.
I feel we're getting close to something, Steve, because I am. Well, one thing more about social context. I lean heavily on humor often. I mean, that is really a how do you say that? Two-edged sword, two-bladed sword, two sides of a sword.
I'm going to say two-edged sword forever now, Svein.
Two-edged sword. No, I mean, because it could work so wonderfully, right? But then you don't know. You're not sure of the social context. There could be stuff in there, and then you just go on and done something that has offended someone horribly, right? So again, there's loads of balance, but I feel there's something missing here. I think I'm going to move us on to the next item. I just want to say I love Chiara's wording on the potential risk of having senior staff in the room, and I think I know what we're getting at, and I always think that if we have senior staff in the room, that's really great. But then you, as a facilitator, might have to be a little bit aware that you need to help the group balance the seniors with the more new people. But Steve, there was something missing, we thought.
In one, and this was when we met to try and get under that kind of what's going on with facilitation. We met for a week in it was Erasmus funded, those were the days, and we were in Tromsø, and we got through most of the week. We were like, there's something going on here, and we got to this goal. Actually, why we're there now as lean practitioners, how could it take us so long to get to purpose? We should hang our heads in shame. But actually, it was a really quite interesting thing to speak to. And it sort of speaks to that authority rule, because quite often someone will say, well, more than once, well, will say, oh, I need you to facilitate this session. I just need you to get it so that this, and this happens. And the model here, these kind of intersecting circles has been very helpful, because I can say, well, actually, if you know what the outcome is, well, why don't we just tell people that's what the outcome should be? It doesn't feel like a facilitated session to me. So I think be prepared to say, well, facilitation maybe isn't the best way to achieve that. Or even, that isn't for me, no thank you, which is quite hard if the outcome is decided, because then the facilitation runs a risk of being, as a friend of mine would say, sneaky. You know, it's not necessarily bad, it just feels a little bit underhand, a little bit sneaky.
I don't remember where we got that phrase. There was someone who came up with the phrase dark facilitation. And a couple of weeks ago, I did some lean training, but with some facilitation in it for the tax administration. And it was so interesting because they came up with this scenario which they recently had been going through, where a leader has asked them to facilitate sessions where the output was kind of given, and they didn't feel that they actually could say no, which puts them in a very difficult and hard position. And I've been there. I hope I haven't done facilitation like that, but I say no. Even internally at the university, I would say that, but I wouldn't say go away in shame, manager, because of suggesting this. But I would actually put up the model. I would draw it up and start talking. So what is this about? Because if it's a given, hey, you're a manager, you're a leader. It's within your boundaries to actually just decide or tell. And I think that for me, this is so crucial. But discovering, kind of being a little bit ashamed myself that we took so long to come to goal. We also looked very hard through the questions from the participants and also couldn't really find any questions related to goal in the model. And
maybe it's just for everyone here actually has no problem with it. They're very good at getting the goal and the outcome. Outcome there.
Yeah, it might be.
For me, when it comes to the rest, because the model sits together, these things are a Venn diagram because they intersect. And so understanding that goal piece helps me have that conversation about social context. So if someone says, well, could you deal with these people a bit like that? I can say, well, if the goal is this, well, then we should consider that. And if that's going on, well, here's a method that might be able to help us with that. And actually, that method, it's going to take this long to do. So we aren't going to be able to fit it within the design of that day. And well, actually, maybe my abilities as a facilitator aren't quite there, but I might have a friend who does. So talking through these things, so I often use this model and the intersection between all these things when I'm designing or thinking about or explaining my facilitation. And going back to this model will be wrong. It will not work for everyone. But for me, it's a helpful platform to start explaining kind of what I'm doing. How do you use the models, Svein?
Yeah, just the same. And I use it quite, well, I'm maybe a bit more in love with structure. Maybe there's a difference between you and me, but I use this like this. I always start out with goal. And when we say that people want to jump to methods, that's true, because people come to me, ask me to facilitate. Could you use this method, please? Well, what do you want to achieve? So in 14 days, when this session is over, you're very, very happy. You feel that the sun is shining inside of you. Why is that? What has happened that made this a success? What is the goal? And then when I know about goal, we talk about design, methods, abilities, and then try to uncover if there's something around social context that plays into this. But this is how I use it, actually, and doing that in that order first, and then I could go back and forth and do all those kinds of discussions with others and even myself. But after we set that up, that has been a huge help for me in my facilitation. And as we started out those a few years back, that was also that moment when I understood that, aha, it's facilitation I've been doing. Didn't know that it had a name for it. So for me, I use that model quite structured when planning or going through stuff with whoever wants me to do something.
So, as we run up to the top of the hour, this is the curve where we started out. So I suppose, in terms of feeding our facilitation skills, Fenari, what is it that you think has enabled you to feel like you're moving more to the expert side of that graph?
Because if I'm looking a few years back or two when we started, of course, I mean, it's training, it's actually doing the stuff. Facilitation is something you have to do it to learn it, right? You could read, you could listen to seminars, you could investigate all kinds of background stuff, but you actually have to do it. So that plays a part. But for me, it's been vital to have someone to discuss facilitation with deliberately. Like the thing that we do, meet up every week, we pick up some kind of situation that we've been through for the week, do that reflection, peer mentoring, and then go in and change and do something all over again and try that out, and then continue to do that. That has been, for me, I think the most important factor in moving my facilitation forward. And I have, of course, based on my own judgment, have done so. So I recognize that I'm quite experienced and skilled at it, but I think that having someone to reflect on and actually doing that actively has helped me immensely.
And we joke about 100 YouTube followers. Well, it would be nice if you all did follow us on YouTube. But the purpose of publishing the videos is as much about mutual accountability as anything else. It means that we know that we have to do that professional development piece because we put something out there, even if it's just a minute or two to go there. Now, and of course, as lean practitioners, this is in our blood. So really, this is saying, well, act with integrity and do that in continuous improvement on your own practice as a facilitator, which I think, if I'd have remembered, would have helped me with one of the most difficult questions I ever had from an academic, which is, what gives you the right to talk to me about how to do improvement? And at the time, I blustered and couldn't say a thing. But actually, what I would say now is, because I have practiced it myself, and here's what I've learned. And I would probably ask the academic to tell me about their field a little bit first, which always warms them up. So that is the Biokraftig facilitation model. And I hope that we've put that a little bit in the light of the questions that you asked before we joined. But there's one thing else to say about the Biokraftig facility. Do you want to tell us how this came about, Svein?
What came about that we met up and did this, or how we drew up this stuff? Or
well, it was the end of our week, and we were sitting in the boardroom upstairs next to your office, Svein.
We were looking at the model and, of course, feeling quite satisfied with ourselves. And I started thinking about, well, you came over here from the UK, and there's been these historical connections between our countries, and then suddenly we noticed, oh, this is, of course, the Viking ship facilitation, and it kind of mostly fun, also made a little bit of sense. It wasn't intended to be like this, but when we kind of had a stretched out Venn diagram,
we thought, well, let's make it a long boat to travel around and journey with facilitation.
Having said that, I don't think there were much facilitation back in the days with the Vikings and stuff like that. But of course, maybe there was a little bit of facilitation.
I heard the Vikings got a bad rap. I heard they were actually really friendly people going along, trading, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, so thank you. And I hope that's been interesting to listen to some of our stories about facilitation and the journey that we've kind of taken to in our kind of facilitator practice. But we have some time for questions, I think. And so I think we'll open to Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both very much. Lots to think about there, and your hints and tips and your experience is really, really interesting and invaluable. If people could start putting some questions in the chat, I've got one to kick off, if that's all right. I was really interested, I think it was you, Steve, who said that it's about controlling. I think it's having the confidence, isn't it, to control less and give responsibility to. And that's quite a mind switch. We go in and think, right, I've got to run this session, everything that happens like clockwork, and it's perfect. And that's where the stress comes from, because you're dealing with people and people are unpredictable. And we had a lot of questions, didn't we? Can you talk about when things go off the rail or people don't behave? And you have touched on some of those. But I wondered whether
I'm wondering too.
Yes, I think we've lost a little bit of audio feed.
Well, let me go into. I mean, there's a comment in the end there from Nefra. Oh, sorry, Sarah. Can
you still hear me?
What we're doing is we're modelling dealing with the unexpected beautifully, and just picking it up. So sorry, Svein, you were saying?
Yeah. There's a comment from Nefra, and it goes to this. You can have. And you should have, in my opinion, or have plans, and you could have several scenarios planned out, but you have to be prepared to ditch the plan. And some wise person sometimes said that any kind of plan doesn't survive the first point of attack. And because we're dealing with people, right, as Sarah said, and that's why we need to be able to do that. And for me, that is about, as I said, confidence and a little bit of courage. We have a professor here who gave a speech at the conference in 2018 who wanted to lift up courage. I mean, what's the worst thing that can happen? I mean, rarely people die from a facilitated event that's gone bad. And just be prepared to ditch the plan and go for it. And what I do, I've learned from you, Steve, is just to open up. And on Friday, I had this big session with loads of people, big affinity mapping. And suddenly people start to say, but we want to do it differently. Oh, good, tell me. And then we did some experiments and we went further from that on a variation, which is perfect. I mean, the outcome was better because of this. So I think that's key to me, to be just have them courage to leave your own plan and think that someone else had a better idea.
I mean, control is a theme that's emerging in the chat that I see putting up too, which is really interesting, because I was talking to a very wise facilitator, much wiser than me, who talked about facilitation as creating the space or holding the space for others. And so it's a kind of and there's a comment that's popped in about mind shift when it comes to coaching, that it's not about knowing what the right answer is, but for me it's about helping a group break that down and proposing useful processes for that group to come to their own conclusion about that answer. And there are paradoxes in facilitation. You know, you need to really care about the goal, and often we do as lean practitioners, but we also really have to give responsibility to the group to deal with it, right? And that's something that I've learned quite recently, that kind of giving the power to the group there. Now, there's a question that's come up about two questions. How do you balance contributions for everyone in terms of more or less power equitably, so that the decisions reached at the end are not just a reflection of the most powerful voices in the room? And what do you do if you have one or two very eager people who won't stop contributing?
I'll mention one of my favorite tools. I don't know if there's some expression in English to this, but I call it 1-2 all or 1-3 all. So by starting off, having everybody work separately and actually writing down their thoughts. And when they start sharing, they do it by turns. So when Gretel have 10 ideas and Steve Yorkstone have 2, they would do that. Of course, Gretel would have to come up with those. But if you let somebody take command and just blurt out everything they have, they've set the tone. They started off on that road. So I try to actively force people to go by rounds, which is a good thing. Another one is to actually be aware of group size. So I have an excellent article over here talking about that. So it's a question of, do you really want a real dialogue, or would you have kind of a serial monologue? And according to this article, there's a breaking point on the size of 5. If you go above that, it's very hard to be able to have everybody participate. So you could break it down, put in small groups, make sure that people actually contribute by forcing them to do so by rounds about some examples. And if that doesn't help, maybe you have to have a wee chat with that someone who is contributing more than others.
But there's a subtler challenge, which I think the earlier question picked up in chat, which was about how, without intending to, well-meaning people with big voices are able to sway a group, but there's that little person there who's bringing with them that truth. They maybe know that little thing about the database or that little thing about the student experience and it's that 1% difference, which, if that group knows that now, will save so much down the line. And for me, when I am thinking about the purpose and the design as we go through, I will think about ways of enabling those people to contribute, often by using writing, often by enabling people to think and have enough time to go through. I love that question that Frankie's put there that I use too. I'd love to hear who others haven't contributed much, but sometimes people who haven't contributed much, they're maybe not even able to answer that question. So I might, again, think about those structures that you can use to help with that. Think about using writing to enable people to speak up. And if you see something, well, often I play devil's advocate, and I might or represent an underrepresented view deliberately, and I might foreground myself as doing that. I might say, there's only one comment here about this. What does that tell us? So I might just draw the eyes to something there. What about you, Svein? How do you ensure that those who have gifts but don't know how to show them are able to bring them into the group?
Well, it's that old, a bit mundane answer that you need to, and how do you do that? You need to make that secure space for people to actually share. And that means that sometimes you could do that by, setting the mood in the room. You have to model that behavior yourself, all that stuff. I like the comment from Elena, said, I like to think of facilitation as controlling the room without anyone noticing. That idea of the facilitator not being the superstar. This is actually this is hard for me. I thrive on getting seen and getting recognition and stuff like that, and combined with my tendency to use humor, that is a dangerous combination. And I think that, don't blend with the curtains, but kind of don't be the superstar side of it. Yeah,
I quite like naming my own uncertainties or my own vulnerabilities to model a space where it is okay to be uncertain and vulnerable. And often, and sometimes that's as simple as always asking the question as to what does that 3-letter acronym actually mean, or those kind of things. Now, has Sarah managed to catch up with us on the internet over there?
Can you hear me?
Still paused. You're back in the room. Hurrah!
Yes, I'm back in the room. Yes, I don't know what happened there. Sorry for freezing on you. Actually, the question I was going on to ask was about starting off a workshop. How can you engender a really good atmosphere in your workshop right from the get-go. So you've got your agenda, people know when the breaks are, they know there's coffee, but you want to sort of perhaps do a warm-up or something to get everyone going and feeling safe and comfortable. So have you got any hints and tips on that?
This can be a really good idea to start off with something, some kind of activity that both gets people to share something and to reflect. And I know that this is a topic that where the facilitation community divides. Some love to use icebreakers, some don't. My feel of that is it needs to go speak to purpose. What is the goal here? So when you do activities like that, it needs to speak to what you're trying to achieve. Personally, I like to use quite big visual cards with pictures and ask questions that help people to start to reflect on the topic we're having, and use it. Do that with a picture to kind of engage the visual part of the brain as well. Yes, pick a card.
These are Dixit cards. It's a game, and you can choose a card and tell a story about how this card links to the session today. But think about the social context. Yeah, we love Dixit. Think about social context. If I'm working with deans and professors, they're going to look at this and go, why are you using some reductive, facile model? We're talking about something serious here. What if I'm working with deans and directors? I might go, so tell us, what's an interesting research question you've come across this week? As a question at the start of a warm-up thing, you know? Very often that introduction piece there. Yes, you're right. Not just deans and professors get turned off by Dixit. And a lot of deans and professors would love playing Dixit, but just it's worth being a little bit mindful about those kind of techniques. But often my favorite is just to ask a gentle, fun question as people introduce themselves and give people the option not to ask it. I used to ask, what was the first record you've bought? Although that's now not the case anymore. People don't buy records. I quite like asking people, if you were a South American animal, what would you be? I know, but I think you'll find things that fit you and fit your organization.
This speaks back to social context. I mean, the whole discussion and also the comments in the chat now, because it could feel like it's not appropriate to do such and such. But I mean, for me, again, come back to it needs to be relevant. It needs to speak to what we are doing there in the session so that it actually feels valuable. And one thing that I've learned also is help people to be active listeners. If you do a round like that, a startup exercise, people need to pay attention. And Steve has introduced me to the concept of creeping death. I mean, how do you avoid that people become so preoccupied by thinking about what am I going to say when it's my turn that they don't actually get anything from that? Then, I mean, then it's a waste of time. So do that. Have people, for instance, write down, and then they can concentrate on what comes. So again, a method or a game or a thing to set the tone in the room to help people start reflecting and build that safe space to share. We need to think about what is useful, because if people don't listen, it's waste.
Yeah, I hate creeping death. That's the one thing that I would hate. Person who posted at 1:10 that going around the room, it's awful. No one listens because they're focusing on what they're going to say before they speak, and once they've spoken, no one listens because they're just relieved that they've already said their bit. Just awful. Randomizing the order is another thing that can help. But Svein, Gretel doesn't sound safe. Oh, Gretel's dying to share something in chat. So we invite her to come off mute.
Let's be brave. Be brave.
Am I allowed to?
Let's see what happens.
I just wanted to share a coaching thing that I've used, and I've always been nervous about using, but it works on building energy in the room. And you start off with getting people to stand up, and they go and just say, go and talk to somebody you know. Talk about the weather, how you got here, you know, what you're looking forward to. And then you put a pretend time, you give them about a minute. And then you say, now stop where you are, and you go up to people, what you're talking about. And then you get them to jumble up and get them to meet somebody they only know, that perhaps met once or twice. and they do that. And then you put a question in, well, what are you looking forward to today? And then it starts to get into the subject matter. So it may be something on the agenda. And then you move them around once more and get them to talk to somebody they don't know. And then start to talk about, you know, whatever is on, you know, what you make it sure it matches your agenda item. And it's absolutely amazing and really powerful. And I've never used it when it's not worked. But I'm always nervous about using it. But I just kind of wanted to share it. That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Greta.
Yeah, and here we are in an area where I mean, it's easy to find exercises around with quick web searches, and then it's just about figuring out would this work, and the only way to really know it is to try it, which comes back to that courage part, and then learn from it.
I love Frankie's comment in chat about asking the group about explaining why we're doing an icebreaker. I often do that. I might ask consent to do an icebreaker. I might say, well, I'm thinking we might do this, or we might do that. And this would do these things and might be like this. And this would do this and might be like that. What would you think, or should we do something else? So I enable the group to have a little bit of a responsibility of how that kind of icebreaker goes. Because I'm aware that icebreakers can be cringing, although I love them. Now, sorry, you popped in there.
Yeah, so we've got a question from Melissa at 103, which we haven't quite covered yet. And this is about getting people to stay on track. Mm-hmm. So when it starts straying off the task, how do you kind of bat it back on course, as it were, without perhaps stifling discussion? Because we do always have limited time on these things, don't we?
Agreed. So we could run the risk of being too polite, and then we go off track, and the session is not as useful as it could be. A suggestion that came up here one time that we did is, I don't think if I have a translated word for it, but when you start to go off track, we could have agreed upon before we start that we will have someone guarding us. We will have someone watching over us. Assign one of the people in the room to be kind of a on-track, off-track guard. The group gives the authority to bring us back, and could do that quite efficient by saying, guys, I feel we are off track again. So you could give that authority to someone within the team. So that was a suggestion that came up one time. I tried it a couple of times, and it actually works quite well, and it's very efficient. But then you might have to have a off track person as well. no, but I think that could be an idea.
I think of some people who have a lot to say, and I think often they need the space to say that. And sometimes I find people, when they feel that they have not been heard, they end up repeating that thing as well. So for me, I like to find a way so that someone can know that we've got that, we've understood that, we're going to hold that and make sure we deal with it, but outside the time that we have just now, because we've agreed we've come here to do this. Unless the group is saying, we're not going to do this, we're going to shift to that, which you can do as a group. It's up to you. You're a bunch of grown-ups, but the agenda was this. So can we do it? So often I would ensure that something is written down clearly and bounded, and that could be on a wall in a car park in a big event, or it might be on any other business note at the bottom of an agenda referred to somebody as an action point. But I think people knowing that it's genuinely hard. And one of the things that I find myself doing in facilitation is just reflecting back to the group what's going on and raising their awareness of what's happening so that they can decide how to navigate it. But it genuinely can be hard. I think everyone knows it can be.
Yeah, we know this, and it's also could be hard to judge if we are really off track. It just might be an idea we are following that could seem to be or prove to be very important. So it's also not that easy to say that. I often use I break down the structure of the agenda so that I know I have timings. I share that often with the group. And when we're into a discussion like that, I would say, for instance, well, we are here now. We said we wanted to use no more time on this. Now the group has to choose. If we go further down this road with this question, then we actually take time from what's going to happen at the end. Because it's the time you use too much is the time that you would like to have for later on. So you could also have the group come in and say, oh, well, we think that this is more important. So you could just change that part of the agenda. But it's hard to just decide this is off track or this is not. Not always, of course.
And we've got a question from Hannah about how do you contract with the group? So I guess this is right at the start. How do you agree your kind of house rules for the day? Do you have a standard approach, or do you let the group decide? Or
I think explicit contracting can be so clumsy. And again, this is one of the kind of what things get your goat. One thing that gets my goat is when a facilitator rushes through a kind of and this is how we will work together as a group thing without actually talking to anybody about it, just writes up a series of rules and assumes that people will do it. You know, as an internal facilitator, often there is a tacit way that we work in the organization. So I can work to name that. When it comes to contracting for the group, what I will do is I will reflect on purpose. And before the group gets together, I will say, this is when we're gathering for, this is how long we're gathering for, we're here to do this. At the start of the meeting, I will often say, well, here's what we're here to talk about. Is that right? Is that the correct thing that we're here to do? Yes, good. If it's important that we have a sense of psychological safety, I will talk about Chatham House Rule, and I will name the Chatham House Rule, which is, we will talk about what is said in this meeting outside it, but we will not say who said it. You know, there's often this, oh, it's Chatham House Rules, and people think that means that you won't say anything about it, and it's just awful. And people say, this will be confidential. I'm like, well, really? Really? If someone crosses a legal threshold on a certain number of things, I know I will not be keeping that confidential, thank you very much. You know, so I like to sort of push back on those things a little bit. What about you, Svein?
Well, I tend to, people have the agenda. There will be some stuff on that, but I won't do written explicit kind of rules for this session. But what I tend to do is that I say to people that there will be break. I will assume that people are here because they want to participate in this, but still we are adults. So what we have, if we have stuff we need to sort out, like go to the loo or take a biscuit or actually go out and answer that email, please do that. Make sure that you are able to use your mind or in your presence the best way you can in here, but sometimes there's just stuff that we need to do. So that would be kind of encouragement, and then we go on as we do. So I tend not to have very, very kind of strict or very written down rules.
Is there something you do that allows the space to be psychologically safe, Svein? In terms of a series of rules or an explicit agreement?
Well, not to that extent, no. I actually don't. So it's more about how we start out, about the goal, and also how I model how I want others to behave in the meeting. And if we are talking about stuff that where people could feel vulnerable, I also name that out. It's just say that it's okay. On Friday, I started to share that I'm insecure about some kind of reorganization we're doing. I was facilitating a group, they were doing reorganization. So I just started to share that, and that it was easy for people to start sharing. So yeah, I mean, people are so different. If you have a group of 20, I mean, someone would love it to be open. Someone would like that hardcore meeting rules.
I find it, I'm mindful of one facilitator whose expertise is facilitating across multiple accessibilities. And what she would say is that there is no such thing as a safe space. That what you experience as a safe space may put someone else into a very challenging position. And so I always bear that in mind, but I try to bear that in mind. And when anyone says, oh, this room is a safe space, I always feel a little bit, what's going on here? But maybe that's my internal paranoia showing. Sarah, help me out.
Well, we haven't got any more questions, unless there is anything I've missed. If so, could people highlight it to me? Here we are. Who is this from? Oh, from Tammy. Are you sharing your... Oh, it's a thank you.
Oh,
My name could be confusing in English because, I mean, there is a part of it that seems like it's something else.
Oh, yes, it was at the start. Yes, I see. Yeah. So I think, I mean, you've given us lots to think about. And I also put in the chat, and I think Tammy did as well, that liberating structures, which has got lots of different ideas. I think it's made me reflect that we get a bit stuck in the rut of the way of doing things. You know, oh, well, we'll do post-its for this, and we'll then we'll get people up and ask them this, and you sort of get into a rather sort of typical way of doing things, and perhaps you need to break out and try some new things. But you've got to be brave, haven't you, and try it. So I think that we've come to the end of the questions. And any last thoughts you want to share?
I would say that reflection on action piece will always see you right. And if you can find someone to support you in that, then and hold each other accountable, it can be really useful.
And also, you know, when you're ready, then when you start your facilitating group, it feels very, very important. But I think that we need to have both the will and the interest and the courage to just experiment a little bit. It's not dangerous to fail if we actually learn from it. So I think that in the long run, that is also important. And of course, I like the idea of being a little bit playful. So, yeah.
So the ultimate message is just be brave and give it a go. And you learn every time you do it, really. Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. And thank you, Stephen and Svein, for your wisdom. And good luck, everyone, with your ongoing facilitation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.